Hey everybody, I'm Jason Malika. Welcome to episode 3 of Pints and Pizza with Professors. Today we're talking about diversity and inclusion, something that's not only a popular topic in the workforce and around the world, but especially on college campuses in the United States. How can we make a more diverse and inclusive classroom, a more diverse and inclusive campus? What can we do better? What are we doing well already? Well, we'll talk to Professor Priya Doshi, my colleague in the American University School of Communication. She's our school's diversity and inclusion officer, and she is well qualified to discuss what we need to do and what we are doing already to make campuses around the world and workforces more diverse and inclusive. We are hoping you enjoy this episode and give us your feedback, but until then, enjoy episode 3. Welcome to Pints and Pizza with Professors, a podcast dedicated to help you, the college student, crush it in the classroom and in your careers.
We're just two college professors with an obsession for learning and a great slice of pie, throwing out no BS truth bombs to help guide you through the unknown.
We also celebrate the ideas and talents of emerging professionals and embrace the learning culture of now.
We're all adults having adult conversations, so adult language might be used.
Hey, grab a slice of pie, grab a pint, and let's go shoot the ish. Welcome to another edition of Pints and Pizza with Professors. I'm Jason Malika, pleased to be joined by my co-host, Megan Wagner. Megan, how are you today?
Hello. What's going on?
You know, it's just another day in the world of Triple P, you know? We just try to continue to crank out great episodes, and I think this week we've got a great one, and we'll get everybody informed as to what that will be shortly. But wanted to first ask you, what has been on your mind so far this week?
I am thrilled that we have made it to episode 3. Yay! We are doing this. No, you know what, Jason? I am so excited that we are doing this project. It has literally been the highlight of my day today. And it's always fun. It helps us to keep our minds sharp, our creative juices flowing, and most importantly, it helps us bring some good into the world. And it helps us, help students and professionals, and this is just such a joy for me to do. And plus I get to talk to my friend and we can just dish out all kinds of fun stuff on this podcast.
I like that. It brings light into the day, you know? And I
Yes,
think
it does.
you know what? And that's we're not being, pompous or anything. That's what we want to do. We want to bring some light. We want to bring some different perspective. We want to bring some fun and education into your day. So that's what we're doing here this week. We are continue to do that for you.
How about you? What's been on your mind this week?
You know, I think as far as, oh man, I'll tell you, aside from being bothered that pumpkin spice lattes are going to be coming out like earlier than they normally do, that kind of, yeah, like they're already out, and it's not. I mean, it's still warm. I'm not even. And look, this is not a knock on Starbucks. I put more money into Starbucks, and my in-laws are thrilled because they have stock in it. But I will drink Starbucks till the cows come home. But I cannot get into pumpkin spice latte this early. It's gotta be October before I have the first one. And then after that, it's like, okay. And then before you know it, it's like November 1st and we're already talking about, the Christmas cups are coming out and, how can we rage out about those? And anyway, so.
Well, it's like when you see Halloween decorations out already, it's like, stop it now.
Well, I can't wait. Now that school's back, you know what's going to happen once that first week or 2 or 3 are done, those pencils, pens, folders, backpacks, they are gone. And what goes in there at stores? Halloween decorations and costumes. So we will be in week 3 of school and the Halloween decorations will be bought. I mean, we can rage on about it, but it's part of marketing. Why you have to get on it. You only have a finite time. It's not like Halloween encompasses, like Thanksgiving or even in a sense like Hanukkah or any of the big religious holidays. You have to kind of kind of tack on that time and say, hey, look, we have to capitalize. If we can sell costumes and candy on September 15th, then we might as well do it. So I get it,
So
but
there's no pumpkin spice latte in your pint today, is there?
no pumpkin spice. It is just regular home brewed coffee today. So
Nice,
yeah.
nice.
So let me ask you, we've talked a lot about coming together and putting this podcast online and being able to come up with an idea. But one of the ideas that we hear a lot about, and one of the things we hear talked about a ton today, is inclusivity and diversity. And
Mhm,
obviously, I think from the perspective of when we talk about it, it's easy for, with all due respect, to, you know, white people to talk about it. But when it comes from a perspective of trying to tell people how to be diverse and inclusive, when you don't have that sort of audience, it becomes more and more important to understand where people are coming from. And
mhm.
so today we're going to be talking with Priya Doshi, who's my colleague at American University in the School of Communication. She's actually the SOC's inclusion officer. We'll be talking to her later in the podcast. But I wanted to ask you, Megan, because I think we've both you come from more of the Midwest area where, with no, as I keep saying, no disrespect, it's, mainly, you know, white area. It's not necessarily known for a diverse background. So I guess the first thing to ask you is, how was it for you growing up? How is it for you when you were in school, not just in college, but when you were growing up?
Mhm.
Did you have a diversity in your school where you felt like, all right, I know how certain people, what their culture's like, et cetera?
Mhm. Yeah, well, so growing up in my hometown of Sullivan, Indiana, which had about 4,200 people, there wasn't a lot of diversity. And not in terms of ethnic diversity, but also religious diversity as well, because as Priya is going to talk to us about, there is a difference. There are many levels of diversity and many different types of diversity. So, no, when I was growing up, it was predominantly white community, and it wasn't if you went to church, it's where you went to church.
Hmm.
And even within the Protestant uh, denomination. I mean, we had one Catholic church in the entire county. So, I mean, there wasn't a lot of diversity. And, I must say, I give full credit to my parents for raising my brother and I to be open-minded and to be willing to learn from other people of different backgrounds. My dad was from Syracuse, New York. My mom was from Indianapolis. So, for them, they grew up in bigger towns. And so they kind of took that mindset and, helped kind of steer my brother and I to have a more open-minded mindset. So, yeah. And then I went to Indiana State University, which was only about 45 minutes north of my hometown.
Hmm.
And that's where I really got to meet a lot of people, other students, not only other students, but other professors from different backgrounds and different religions and different ethnicities. And it was definitely a really great experience. Now looking back, at the time, of course, anything that you kind of enter into that's new to you, it can be intimidating and it can be different, and that's completely fine.
Hmm.
But the truth of the matter is to not fight those differences, to rather embrace it and be like, okay, well, if I'm going to, have a roommate who, and it's not even just, again, ethnic diversity or race or religion, but even people who are from bigger cities. I was this little small town girl, and, one of my best friends in college turned out to be from a bigger city. So she had a different experience than I did. So, it was interesting because I loved, going going home with her and visiting her family in her hometown, and she liked coming to my hometown, but it was very different. And so that was my first real experience in meeting different people from different backgrounds, different religions, races, ethnicities, and now, and I feel like that put me on the path to really be more comfortable with this different people from different backgrounds, because now I live in one of the most culturally diverse cities in North America, which is
Mhm.
Toronto. And oh my God, I love it. I love it. It just, I feel like people, when they bring different experiences and share them with you, it just makes your life better, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, I think in any time that we talk about diversity and we can understand different cultures, I mean, look, I always appreciate, and one of the things I've appreciated more as I've gotten older is that, and this may not necessarily sound like, oh, you're not, that doesn't mean you're a diverse, but I love testing and trying different types of foods. And that doesn't mean going to Taco Bell and getting, a
Yeah,
burrito.
I know, right?
What I mean is, going for Indian food, trying Japanese food, trying different sorts of, different sorts of cultural food. I mean, obviously, I've talked before about going to Italy, and yeah, Italy is, it's not necessarily a different quote unquote culture. But for me, it was, trying the food. But you do have to understand that while it may not be a different color of a person's skin, you do have to understand the diversity that other cultures do have. So if you understand the Indian culture of how they eat certain foods, or what you are supposed to do when you eat that food, or when you go to a true Japanese restaurant, how it's
Mhm.
prepared. It doesn't have to be, you're not going to necessarily see a chef like at a Benihana or a hibachi place. That's how Japanese food is always made, or something. All while this is sort of the overarching discussion of diversity and inclusivity, I think the more we know about a culture and the better we understand who they are and where they come from. And it's about having that discussion. We're communicators. We should
Mhm.
be open to having discussions with our fellow, our colleagues, our friends, our family. Sure, family can lead to discussions you don't necessarily want to have all the time. That being said, we do want to make sure that we are talking about what's important and why we need to be more inclusive. Because
I
go ahead, and let's be honest. I mean, in this day and age, we are seeing a little more, especially from a political perspective. And again, we're not trying to be political, but it's hard to kind of turn away from. We
Mhm.
see how our national discussion is going. It's not diverse. It's not
Mhm.
inclusive. It's definitely very. It's definitely one side of the aisle, and that's it. And I think that does
Mhm.
not. It's not indicative of the rest of the country, but it sure certainly leads us in a direction to think, well, all right, how do we, if we're talking about it on a college campus one way, when we have, world leaders, or at least, US leaders talking about it one way, what's the middle ground here? And we don't get that.
Mhm.
It's too much nowadays.
No, and it's certainly not something we have to shy away from or want to shy away from, because again, meeting or knowing different people and embracing our differences is what makes our life so rich, in my opinion.
Hmm.
And the less we talk about it, the dimmer our lives become. And I love Ellen Pompeo.
Yeah.
she is fantastic because she does not shy away from talking about race. She has biracial
Yeah.
children, and she does not shy away from that. And I feel that this is something that we cannot shy away from, because it is so important, especially in this climate that we're experiencing in the US. And it's just it's not only our due diligence as human beings, but also as it's our responsibility as professors to facilitate and embrace diversity, and making sure our classrooms are more inclusive, and then taking it a step further, making sure our our campuses are more inclusive.
Right.
And I know in our conversation with Priya, which will air in just a minute, but she had some wonderful tips for, for example, if you hear someone saying something that isn't maybe kind or is not inclusive, or she has some amazing advice how to deal with that, because we are in a culture now that it's see something, say something. And so she really has amazing insights on how to handle a situation like that.
Yeah, she does, and I think that's what's the important thing. We kind of realize that we as professors and as eh, without patting ourselves on the back as leaders, it's important in the classroom and outside of the classroom and in today's world that we continue to show that we need to be the people that are leading the discussion with diversity. We need to show
Hmm.
how we can be more inclusive. And again, it doesn't just mean color and religion. It also means gender. The LGBTQ community needs to know that when you come into a classroom, it does, I don't care, from my perspective, I don't care what you are and who you are and how you identify, as long as,
Hmm.
and not as long as, but you're there to learn.
Hmm.
It's not, from my perspective, I don't, everyone, there's this as a common thing. Oh, I don't see race. I don't see color. Well, we all see it. It's a matter of how
Hmm.
you see it. Do you embrace a person's culture? Do you embrace or at least welcome someone if they're gay or they're bisexual or even transgender? How do you go about having those discussions? And
Hmm.
the more we open up to people and realize that we can be a little more inclusive and show our own diversity and show that we understand, look, if you're having a tough time or if you feel like you cannot, you feel like you're not you as a professor, but a student feels that they're not welcomed, it's on us as professors and as educators to say, look, if you don't feel comfortable, I'm going to make you feel comfortable, but I'm also going to find out ways that we can make you feel comfortable overall on the campus. It's not about making you feel like just because you're here as a number in the classroom. No, I always tell my students, when you're here, if you have a problem, whether it's mental, physical, you feel like you're being singled out in some way, come to me because we will solve the problem. My office is designated as a safe space on campus. So
Hmm.
that's why I always tell students, come to me. You want to talk, it will be held in confidence. I want you to know that you're welcome. And I think we need more of that on
Hmm.
campuses, but from professors. And again, that's not to say that there are many professors and educators and campuses out there that aren't like that. There are plenty of them are. We see, if you do a Google search, you're going to see how campuses, go about diversity and inclusion. But it's a matter of continuing to move past just that web page or that statement and say, we're going to put that into action, and you can see each day in the classroom how it's in action.
Mhm. Absolutely. And for me, I teach online only right now for St. Bonaventure University, and I actually have I call it a netiquette policy
Mhm.
where we're doing discussion posts and we're having conversations, and in it I'm like, we all have different opinions and different perspectives. That's fine if you don't agree with somebody, but you are required to respect it. And if you can't, then we have a major
Mhm.
problem. So I think it's not just feeling inclusive in a physical classroom, but also within an online community as well. And you're right, Jason. That is absolutely our responsibility as professors to not only embrace that openness in our own realms of the classroom, but also make sure that students know that there are answers to problems, and we will help you find out what that is. However, at the same time, I will say that if a student is not feeling included, or if something's going on, then we need to know about it first.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, and this isn't just this kind of goes on, that if there's a problem in the learning environment, if they don't understand something, sometimes they don't always speak up, and that's okay. But if we don't know that there's an issue, how are we supposed to help you fix it?
Right.
You know? So it's always a matter of speaking up, because we will help you find the answer to solutions.
And that's go
So
ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was gonna say, so tell me about your background in growing up in South Jersey.
Well, and I will say this, having, I will, having been born in northern New Jersey, then progressively moving south. I mean, when I was in high school, we had I would say for the time, and that would be anywhere from when I really went to school in Cherry Hill was from 1985, 84, 85 until I graduated high school in 1991. I we had a lot. We had diversity. We had plenty of. We had African American. We had Indian students. We had Japanese and Chinese. So we saw, and we even had plenty of other cultures as well. So I was exposed to many cultures. I never felt like. If I saw someone of a different culture for the first time, I was like, who is that, or what are they, and frankly, having family that was born in New York City and still going to New York, and you walk around New York and you see every different creed, every different type of religion
Mm-hmm.
person, that you can find, regardless of whether it's, Midtown Manhattan or it's the Upper East Side or the Bronx or Brooklyn. You're going to see, or Long Island, Staten Island, you're going to see a lot of different cultures. And a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different foods and a lot of different people and temples and things like that. So, even as I grew up, I was, I really was lucky because I never felt like I never racism wasn't part of the discussion, in the sense that
Mm-hmm.
there was never anyone, and my parents never looked at anyone differently because of a different race. My dad had coworkers that were different, creeds and religions, and from different
Mm-hmm.
countries, and so it wasn't. I never, and again, this isn't to make it seem like I never dealt with, I was just seeing white people all the time. It was more of, I understood it, but what happens is, I don't think you truly understand until you actually get out into the real world. I think, you go to
Mm-hmm.
college, you see people of different backgrounds, and okay, you see people in different classes, and okay, they're different than, but then when you finally get it, especially from my perspective, when I was in news, it, I would cover stories that, I wouldn't necessarily see in, you know, middle to up, middle class or upper middle class Cherry Hill, New Jersey. You're going into neighborhoods um, that it wasn't exactly safe, or you would think, how can someone of any creed or color or race be living here? Um, so I think from many perspectives, and even then, as I, kind of got into the field of PR and got into working on college campuses, you end up dealing with students that are from different backgrounds. The every campus, I think, in many ways in this day and age, is becoming more and more diverse, and we're seeing more
Mm-hmm.
people, not just of colors, as I keep saying, in creeds and religions, but of different, different gender identities. So if we do not adapt, and if we don't listen, and if we do not open our minds to the different things that are going on campus and often in the working world, we are going to be dinosaurs, and we'll be, kind of
Mm-hmm.
shuffled out the door saying, look, if you can't see and listen to people of different opinions, colors, creeds, identities, it's not a matter of saying, oh, well, you can't, can't be on this earth anymore. It's a matter of, this isn't the way it's going. You cannot marginalize someone because they say they are transgender. You cannot marginalize someone because they are from a different country, and oh, they'll never learn language. That's just not right. And we can, especially in the college classroom, but even more so as you get out of it and into the real world, if we're not welcoming people and professionals, new professionals into the industry, everyone has a different set of skills, whether you're from Japan or
Mm-hmm.
whether you're from Joplin, Missouri. You
Mm-hmm.
people need to understand that every person has something to offer. It's a matter of us now to listen and get people to understand more how we as educators can help the new generation, the next generation of professionals, no matter what field they're in, to change the way it's looked upon in the working world.
My biggest hope is that someone will hear this podcast in 30, 40 years, and they'll look and be like, were they really talking
I
about
know.
this? You know what I mean? I sincerely hope that somebody listens to this podcast and listening to our chat with Priya and our own conversation, and they were like, oh my God, they were talking, like, how old
I
is
know.
it? I really truly hope that this conversation seems completely asinine in 30, 40 years, because we will have made such progress. I truly, truly hope that. And I truly hope that, like, wow, they really had to talk about that. They were,
Yeah. And I think that's the one thing where I'm glad that as we're talking about this, that we realize, again, not patting ourselves on the back, but we realize the importance of changing the conversation and changing it in a way that is more positive, and a way for us to make sure that every student, every new professional, every current professional understands that they are valued. I don't
Mhm.
care whether you're a Catholic, I don't care whether you're Hindu, or whether you read the Quran. We need to make sure that we understand where people are coming from, because part
Mhm.
of the issue that we have is we hear so much of the noise, and, oh, this religion believes this, and these people, oh, how can you be transgender? That's impossible. That's not. No, it you don't know what's
Mhm.
inside that person. You haven't walked in their shoes, so you don't know.
Mhm.
We only know how we've walked. You can have a friend for 30 years that is African American. Does that mean you understand what they went through or what their family has been through in the 30 years that you've known them? No, you don't, because you may be with them for a long time, and you may know them very well, but that doesn't mean you understand what their family went through, what their relatives went through. And I think that's the one thing where we need to make sure that we are always listening. We are always trying to become
Mhm.
more evolved, and it kind of sounds like a broken record, but becoming more inclusive and understanding where people are
Mhm.
coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's unfortunate that we have to have these conversations because we want everyone to get
Mhm.
along. We all we want everybody to embrace and accept one another and move along, but unfortunately that's just not the case. And I think what Jason, you and I are trying to do by shedding light on this topic, using our newly minted platform, is we want to put some good in the world, and we want to talk about this in hopes that it will maybe get at least one person thinking differently about somebody who's a little bit
That's
different from
right.
them.
Yeah, and
You
I
know?
think,
Yeah.
and one of the things too, and I was reading, and going through some lead up into this podcast, and as we were talking about bringing Priya on board to have this discussion, is I, don't want to get too technical, but I'll share the link when it's applicable. But there was a study done in the Journal of Undergraduate Neuroscience Education. Now, okay, we're not going to get too technical, but this is to show you just how important diversity and inclusion is on all levels. In this paper called "A Discussion of Diversity and Inclusivity at the Institutional Level: The Need for a Strategic Plan," from that abstract, it says lack of diversity is most notable within higher administrative levels of universities across the country. We have now reached a point where true reflection and assessment of inclusive practices on our campuses must be carried out so that we fully serve the needs of all of our students. Yes, absolutely. And this study goes on to show within the STEM studies and within neuroscience schools, and how important it is, because, granted, we see STEM education as important, but there are, you know, schools don't always, and this is the, kind of, as you get into higher education, it gets more specialized. What this study is talking about, and I'll let people read it, is, it's important regardless of whether you're in communication, marketing, public relations, whether you're working in sports marketing or sports medicine. We need more diversity at that level, at the institutional level,
Mhm.
because if we don't do it the right way, or we don't do it at all, universities are going to get picked out, and they're going to get singled
Mhm.
out for being, they're going to get singled out for being on the wrong side of the times. And so I appreciated this study, not because I really love breaking down, scientific journals and sitting there all day reading them, but this one really jumped out because while we're talking about it from, we are both in the communications field, and we both teach in, at places where communications is the focus in their schools. Um, we can see that even in the sciences, it's important that we are being more diverse and being more inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was a great read, and we'll be sure to put
Hmm.
it in the episode description
Sure.
in the show notes.
So we do want to bring on board Priya Doshi, my colleague in AU School of Communication. Um, Actually, at American University, we have a Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And Priya, as our inclusion officer in the School of Communication, she's been teaching courses since 2013 on cross cultural and international communication. And why that's so important is because prior to her coming to AU, she had nearly 20 years of PR experience working in communications initiatives for, among other places, the British and Swiss embassies and the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. So we thought this is perfect. I actually know Priya, obviously being my colleague in the school of communication, but she is more than well qualified to talk to you and to us about diversity and inclusion. So we welcome aboard my colleague, Priya Doshi. Well, it is certainly a thrill to welcome my American University School of Communication colleague, Priya Doshi, to the podcast. Priya, thanks for joining Megan and I. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you for having me.
Hi, Priya. It's so nice to have you on here. We really appreciate your time.
Thanks, Megan. It's a pleasure.
So, right off the bat, we've already told everyone, what you're doing, not just from a diversity and inclusion standpoint at AU, but also obviously what you teach, et cetera. But the reason having you on today is because we want to discuss diversity and inclusion. So, those two words can mean many things to many people. What does it mean to you, diversity and inclusion?
That's a great question. And I think they're often paired together, but they actually mean two different things. So, diversity to me is something that really should be looked at in a comprehensive way. It shouldn't just be what people typically or first come to mind for people, which is, racial, ethnic, nationality diversity, but also things like religious diversity, sexual and gender identity diversity, income diversity, educational background, and worldview or political viewpoint. So diversity really is quite a comprehensive term in my mind. And often, if we try to segment it too much by simply thinking of the differences that are obvious just by looking at people, we miss a lot of the diversity that's really under the surface that is more, for many people, much more important in terms of their identity.
And I think some of the things I believe we see on college campuses, not just in particular schools, but on the campus in general, is, at least from our perspective, we're in a very diverse area in Washington, D.C., in the D.C. metro area. It seems like we are having much more of a discussion about diversity and inclusion. And while they are, two terms and they sometimes are grouped together, we often see them as you can be diverse, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're inclusive. Would that be a correct terminology in saying that?
Absolutely. And when we get to defining inclusion, I would say that often places do have diversity, at least on the face of it. But the question of inclusion is around whether people really feel comfortable being who they are and being able to share that with others. It's about whether they feel represented and listened to, and really safe in the spaces that they're in. And often, again, this is something that people don't readily share about whether or not they truly feel included, unless they feel comfortable sharing that with the person asking them, or if it's an anonymous survey. So that's not as obvious sometimes as the diversity that we think we see. And the importance of both of those is really that it's not just about making everybody, it's not necessarily all about sort of holding hands and making everybody feel great about themselves, but there's a real strategic advantage for any institution that looks to promote diversity and inclusion, and that is that it really avoids groupthink. It enriches everybody more because they're able to have the perspectives of so many. And I think that's something that's really valuable to point out.
Priya, I do have a question for you about the climate and maybe trends you are seeing in inclusiveness across college campuses, both at AU and also on a national level. Um, at this point in time in the United States, it's a very precarious um, climate that we're going through right now in
Hmm.
terms of the nation as a whole. And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that climate that we're seeing on campuses all over the country and at AU. If you feel that that college campuses are embracing inclusiveness more or less.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that so much of that can depend on what part of the country you're talking about and what the makeup of the student body is, but also, what administrators are driving. I want to say that I see diversity and inclusion as growing in prominence on most college campuses. It's something that, again, many institutions are realizing, also through the guidance of their accrediting bodies, that it's important for them to leverage and important for them to center. And so you're seeing this real push for recognizing diversity, being more inclusive, looking at diversity not just in the student population, which is naturally diversifying just given the changing demographics in the US, but also in terms of the staff and the faculty and administrators at universities. And there's been a really, I think, deliberate and positive push toward that at most universities. As far as where students are, I think that's really a gamut. And I think, again, it depends on where you are and how diverse the places that you come from in a lot of cases. And so if you take a campus like American universities, I would say we really are on the higher end of awareness and diversity and inclusion in terms of the student population. There's a expectation among most students that they will interact with and have relationships with people of different backgrounds, and they're generally fine with that, especially when you talk about ethnic and racial diversity. But I guess in other campuses, there's not necessarily that expectation of diversity. And one of the things I think a lot of schools are doing is trying to help students who maybe have come from homogenous environments be more prepared to deal with environments where they are encountering people of different backgrounds. So I can give you an example of that from American. One of the things that AU has done for the student body, which I think has been a really great step, is they've introduced the American University Experience. And this is a program that is a 1 year course for all incoming first years and transfer students. And they take the first semester is basically about learning about American University and all of the systems and processes that students would need to know, everything from the healthcare center to counseling services to using the metro. But the second semester is dedicated to diversity, inclusion, and identity. And this is kind of to give everybody a common language, and the idea that if they've never been exposed to people of different backgrounds, here's their chance to get acquainted with the terminology, with the kinds of with the ways that different people are thinking about this, and some of the best academic thinking that's going on diversity and inclusion. But I don't think Americans unique in offering this kind of thing. But I do think it's wonderful that it's mandatory, and it's something that they've just rolled out. I think it's only been 2 or 3 years that it's been in place.
Absolutely, and that's an excellent segue into my next question for you. For me, I grew up in southwestern Indiana, and my hometown was 4,200 people, predominantly white, and so I attended Indiana State University and graduated from Indiana State University, which I absolutely loved my alma mater. And I'm wondering how if there's a incoming freshman or incoming student that comes to a university that maybe doesn't have those programs that American does or other universities do have to kind of help with that transition. What are some tips that you can offer students to better adjust to those situations, and so they can embrace and learn from other students who are from different backgrounds, different cities, different countries, different, and again, at Indiana State, for me, I met people from all over, from Chicago, from Indianapolis, and I loved meeting different people and learning, but for me, that's all in how I was raised.
Hmm.
So a lot of students may have not been exposed to that kind of upbringing or mindset. So are there some tips that you can offer students who so they can succeed in becoming better acquainted and have a better understanding of other students from different backgrounds?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think that that's true, where there isn't necessarily a platform or a mechanism for people to be given that ability to interact with others. They need strategies, right? So, from the perspective of that, I would say getting to know people on an individual basis is always the best recipe for helping people understand difference. often people are intimidated because they think, oh, I don't want to necessarily walk up to that group of students who look different from me and start talking to them. And I get that, because we tend to kind of stick with what we know, particularly if you think about a first year student on a college campus. All they're looking for is kind of common ground with other
Hmm.
people. And if it's not, that's
Yeah.
not immediately visible, you can see them retreating. So I think, though, that building those sort of one-on-one relationships between people of different backgrounds is important. And I think one thing we can advise college students is, be prepared to listen and maybe think about hearing from people as much as you're telling people about yourself. And I think if you do that, you may be surprised and delighted to learn what's different and what you have in common with people who you may not have ever, that you may not have ever encountered before, people
Right.
with backgrounds
Right.
that you may have not have encountered. So I think
Mhm.
building that at the individual level helps people to really defeat the stereotypes that they might have held, and also allows them to build those personal connections. And that, I think, is a really important bridge building step.
Priya, I think one of the things, and obviously we both come at this from the American university perspective, seeing what we do and what you've done, day in and day out. But what I wanted to know is, and as kind of Megan brought up, there are so many campuses around just in this country that are in areas that, sure, the diversity is growing on the campus as far as how many African Americans are on campus, how many Hispanics, how many people from other countries are on campus. But uh, how do we best make sure that if you have someone that is from Japan, from China, how do we as professors help those students feel much more part of the conversation when they may not be as comfortable? I know they may want to, we feel like we want to be diverse and include them and make them feel welcome, but it can be difficult. What's the easiest way to go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that can be daunting for professors. But I think when you have international students for whom English isn't their first language, and they come from a culture where the learning environment may be very different, what we can do is appreciate that and understand that. And I think meeting with them one on one, again, making the effort to go and talk to the student, invite them to office hours, get to know kind of where they're coming from, what their learning approach has been in the past, and familiarizing them with kind of what's expected in your classroom, getting to know them by name, which is really important. A lot of international students fly under the radar simply because they can't seem to get verbally, they can't seem to get their points out as fast as native English speakers can. And so they often get, sort of swept under the rug, which is unfortunate. So giving them opportunities to provide feedback in other ways, either through small group work or through assignments that require students to maybe write a reflection or write their comments as opposed to speak them. Though there can be a lot of ways to engage, but I think the first step there for professors really ought to be getting to know those students and inviting them in and finding out kind of how they're feeling about things, and whether their expectations are being met in the classroom.
One of the things that I I actually did in a class a year ago, and I had a few students in there that were from another country, and but so I had them come up and give this 5 minute sort of introduction in a way that so it was they weren't we weren't going around the room saying, "Oh, hi, who are you? I'm the professor. You're the student." So they get up, and the student, she was from Japan, and she was speaking fairly well, but then she started to break down and get a little emotional. And I said, "Great." I joked with her. I said, "Great, you're going to walk out of the class today and said." This professor put me through the ringer and made me, get in front of the class when I'm not that comfortable. The funny thing was, the next 2 semesters later, she ended up being part of one of my other classes and came in and she told her friends that are also from Japan, you need to take Professor Mohawk's class because he actually will relate to you and not make you feel like you're, an outsider or something. And I was like, oh, and I'm only saying that because I know we have so many ways of trying to relate to students. And sometimes I would get, at least in my one small experience, it doesn't always have to be that. All right, we have to put it in a block and say if we don't do it this way, they're not going to see it. Sometimes the students want to be more outgoing, and it's a matter of just finding what works best for, while obviously embracing things that work at a university, but also thinking about the own ways you can be more inclusive in a classroom.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's really thinking outside the box. And at the same time, we want to avoid singling out these students, right? So
Hmm.
that's something that is also a little bit, it's two sides of the same coin. On the one hand, you don't want to ignore them. On the other side, you don't want to single them out. So you might take an approach, as long as your class is a manageable size, of going and introducing yourself to everybody and kind of making it a point that everybody in the class come and see you in your office hours as a getting to know you mechanism. And then, maybe you spend a little bit more time with the international student if they're willing to spend the time with you. So it's finding that comfort point, and also recognizing that because of cultural difference, there will be students who are very, very embarrassed by the thought of standing up in front of the class, and speaking. Or there will be students who don't look you in the eye because it's not considered respectful in their culture. And so
Hmm.
being aware of the fact that those cultural differences are profound, and also that education in a lot of other countries where international students are coming from is much more hierarchical. So they're really not used to, in some cases, professors taking a collegial approach with their students.
One more question from the perspective of now, as we look at our students, we're so used to kind of getting them into that diverse and inclusive nature. So we do the best we can on the campus, but how can tomorrow's professional, whether you're in communications, whether you're in, in working with brands, as far as in that way, how can those pros from tomorrow take what they've learned on campus into the working world?
Yeah, I think one great way they can do it, this is all about kind of a different way of thinking. It's a more empathetic and listening based approach, which again is something that if you practice while you're in college, if you learn to kind of listen to people and really hear what they're saying and appreciate that they have different learning styles and different communication styles, you can apply that to the workplace in a plethora of ways, especially when you're talking about anything that's sort of client facing. Because when we talk about serving our clients in so many different professions, we talk about really getting into their minds. And again, if you're focused on diversity and inclusion, you understand that not everybody thinks the same. So the first step is going to really be that kind of comprehensive interview or getting to know you aspect with your clients or with your teammates, or the people you report to, the people that the people that report to you as well. So I think it's a skill that should be cultivated among college students, and that will really never get rusty, because at its heart, it's kind of a form of emotional intelligence, which they can really apply in the workplace.
Priya, I have a question for you about being a facilitator for inclusiveness. And coming from the perspective that if you see someone, whether it be a colleague or a classmate, that maybe isn't embracing someone from a different background, um, maybe they're disrespectful, or they make an inappropriate comment, or they're snide, or we always want to go off of the mentality, see something, say something.
Mhm.
And so when you see that someone is not being respectful or not fully understanding the importance of inclusiveness, how do you recommend that the person seeing something, how they approach it, and how they can better either educate that person or say, like, hey, what's going on? Or
Mhm.
how do we, as witnesses to this lack of inclusiveness, how do we make it better? And how do we potentially turn someone's mindset around, or help turn their mindset around, so we can have a more inclusive and vibrant campus or workplace?
Yeah, I think a lot of that it has to do with power relationships, right? And it depends on who is saying it and what the context is in which they're saying it, or doing an action that is non-inclusive, or could be viewed as non-inclusive or insulting, or offensive in some way. So say, for example, it's a student professor relationship, and you've got a professor who says something off the cuff, and a student in the class isn't directly offended, but could see how others in the class could be offended. Well, there's certainly feedback opportunities there. Some professors will ask for it, some won't. Some students will go beyond the professor and go and tell an administrator or an inclusion officer, or they might report bias, through the traditional pathways. But that's a way that's likely, unfortunately, to put a lot of people on their back foot or defensive. I think as if people are comfortable, or if a student is saying it and a professor is trying to correct them, I think the professor also has to be wary of the fact that he or she could be making the student feel really singled out and kind of feeling like they're an oaf, if they don't approach it in the right way. So I think you can ask people. So just curious, why did you put it that way, or what makes you say that, and kind of a really sort of wide based question like that, open ended, that then allows the person to say, oh, what do you mean? What do I mean? That okay, and let me
Mhm.
think about what I just said, and maybe that's enough to get the person to pause, provided their intent was not to hurt or insult, but they were doing it kind of, unintentionally. Um,
Yeah, and that's a great approach, asking why. So
yeah,
instead of saying like, "Hey, knock it off," like, which you really want to,
right, right.
but asking like, "Why'd you say that?" Or "Why yeah, I
What
like
made you
that."
say that? Right.
Yeah, it's a
What
great
brought,
tip.
what was the thinking behind that comment? Or
Yeah,
tell me more about what you just said.
yeah,
Whatever it is, so that you get them talking a little bit. And I do
right.
recognize the reason I bring up power dynamics is because I recognize that for students, that's not easy to do back to a professor, right? So, and we as professors have to be aware of it sometimes. That
Mhm,
and maybe ask for that feedback and that anonymous feedback from people to say, hey, is there anything that I'm doing that's great? Is there anything I'm doing that's terrible?
mhm,
Can you come back to me and tell me that? So yeah, or in a meeting, for example, that type of thing happens. You can call out the person and say, oh well, again, what did you mean by that? Or if they're talking over somebody, say, let's just make sure that so and so has an opportunity to weigh in.
mhm.
So it's kind of being a facilitator, or kind of a timeout. I guess a referee. Sometimes.
Right, right. No, that's a great way to approach it.
You mentioned the being a referee. It's not like it's the family dinner table at Thanksgiving when you have everyone's opinions flying around and you have to sort of find that referee in in the classroom, obviously, or even from a whether it's a colleague perspective or even a student and instructor perspective. We have to be more, as we say, democratic, but make sure that we are including. Making sure everyone's opinion and making sure everyone's, wherever they come from, feel welcome, regardless of whether it's in the classroom or just walking around campus. Priya, we've been talking about diversity and inclusion, but I want to talk about a little more about you here. And because you've had such a great career, not only in the classroom, but outside of the classroom, I wanted to ask you what has been your most memorable career moment to this date?
Wow. Okay, that's good. That's a great one. There have been a lot of great career moments, but I think one of the things that was most meaningful to me was when I was working at the British Embassy. I had been there a couple of years, and one of my colleagues and I, both of Indian background, and we were talking about how the embassy really ought to do an event for Diwali, which is the high Hindu holiday
Hmm.
that's usually in the fall. And this because they had for years done things that were aimed at the Jewish American community and the Muslim American community. And interestingly, in Britain, Indians are the largest minority population, and most Indians are Hindu. So
Hmm.
we'd been talking about this, and so we kind of brought it to the ambassador, and he was very excited about the idea. He said, "I'd love it. I love it. Go ahead and make this happen." So then we had an opportunity to be really creative about this and say, "Okay, we really want to showcase why the embassy is doing this. So why would the embassy of the United Kingdom be doing an event for Indian Americans?" And we talked a lot about the trade relationship between the United States and India, or I'm sorry, the United States and the UK, but how much Indian entrepreneurs were contributing to that, and the fact that the impact of Indian immigrants in the UK had been huge. And so we were really sort of able to bring to bear this cultural event that fit with the strategic imperatives of the embassy, and then was relevant to our American constituents. So it was this wonderful intersection of bringing together what was culturally significant with what was strategically important, and hitting multiple audiences with key messages at the same time. So that was a great event. We were able to do it for several years while I was there, and it was exciting to get the support and even the enthusiasm of the British diplomatic leadership on that.
Did it surprise? Not that I don't say this to be flippant, but did it surprise you of how, even though you said obviously the Indian community in the UK is the largest minority, um, did it surprise you in any way that they were so gung ho about doing it, or did you see it from the perspective of, hey, this isn't much of a surprise, but we're still going to put on something that will show them that it kind of bolster their faith that they had in you already?
Well, I wasn't surprised that they wanted to do it because the ambassador he had served in India, and so he's really familiar with Indian background, was enthusiastic about it from that perspective. But what I wanted to prove to him was that it can be strategic, and I think that we did it. It's not just necessarily a colorful party, but that the point was to show that there is a vibrant trade relationship, that there is a lot of shared heritage actually between those three populations, and that was kind of neat to see that. But yeah, it was this kind of like, how do you make this again not just something that's nice to do because it's an outreach to a community that's not been targeted before or not been included before, but also something that makes sense for the organization, something that actually enhances the organization's excellence and inclusion. So that was a really neat moment, I would say. So yeah, it was memorable for me.
So now that we have your memorable moment to your career, what's the one lesson you hope students learn in your classes? You've made a lot of memories with your students. We've seen a lot of students pass through your classrooms that have gone on to do outstanding things. What is that one lesson you hope they take with them the rest of their academic career and then hopefully into their professional career?
I think the most important lesson I'd want them to think about is realizing that all truths are a matter of perspective, and that we experience everything we do through our lens of lived experiences, which means that each of us are probably experiencing things a little bit differently. So, in order to get to a more comprehensive truth, people really need to listen to this variety of perspectives, and they need to be malleable in their idea of what they think is the right way or the best approach. So that I think is the most important lesson.
Priya, we cannot thank you enough for taking a little bit of time to speak with us about diversity and inclusion. We've obviously it's a very important topic, and while that may sound political, a political way of putting things, I don't think we can stress enough just how important it is to make sure that not only in a college campus, but even in our careers and in the workplace, we need to make sure that we make as many people feel included in what's going on, but embrace their diversity, embrace what they can actually bring. So thank you for bringing us that perspective. Best of luck in the new position this year with AU's School of Communication. I know I'm thrilled to have you as a colleague, and glad you'll be continuing the great work that we've been setting forth on our campus.
Thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to talk with you and Megan.
Yeah, thank you so much, Priya. We appreciate all your insights.
Absolutely.
Kind of,
I like it
playing
too.
off the pizza. Let's grab a slice. But now we
Yeah.
ask you, the audience, a question, and it gives you a chance to give us allows you to give us feedback on our social networks. So, what is our slice of the week this week?
The slice of the week is: how can you help make your part of the world more inclusive? So again, slice of the week: how can you help make your part of the world more inclusive? We would love to hear your thoughts by using the hashtag Pints Pizza Profs on all the social channels. Let us know. Can't
Yeah,
wait to
I
hear
mean, we
it.
want to get your feedback. This is You are a big part of our podcast, so let us know what you think. We'll obviously, share some of those slices on the next episode, next week's show, next episode, however you want to say it. But yeah,
However you're
absolutely.
listening,
Maybe you're
right?
maybe you're pod binging or something, and you're now catching up to all of our episodes. But you know, we want you to be part of it. So Pints Pizza Props on Twitter with the hashtag, and then next week we have I think a really fun episode. We're going to be talking about group work blues. Who, from a professor standpoint, from a student standpoint, we all aren't fans of group work. Sure, it can be fun sometimes, but it can be a slog other times. We will get into that on our next episode of Pints and Pizza with Professors.
We're sharing the good, bad, and the ugly. Jason and I have some really funny stories about group work.
Me too.
I know I
It'll
do.
be fun.
Yeah. All right. And just as a reminder, join our community at pintspizzaprofs.com. We want to build and build and build to make our worlds all just so much better and more fun. Thanks for listening to this episode of Pints and Pizza with Professors. If you like what you've heard today on the podcast, we'd be so grateful if you'd leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening on.
Also, connect with us on social, Instagram, Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, you know where to go, at Pints Pizza Props. You have a question? We'll answer it on the podcast. Use the hashtag Pints Pizza Props.
Once again, I'm Megan Wagner.
And I'm Jason Malika. Cheers.